Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at another interesting topic under respiration. Now, before I start, I just want to ask this little question. Do you actually know that lower or smaller organisms like the amoeba can actually respire or even carry out what we call gaseous exchange? Now, have a picture of this in your mind. Protists, they are actually unicellular organisms and they are called microscopic. It simply means you can only see them with the aid of a microscope. So they are actually very small to the eye. And imagine such small organism, as small as it is, how can it carry out all the activities of life, including respiration? How does it carry out respiration? Now, these and many more we're going to be looking at under this particular topic in respiration system 2. Now, we're going to be talking a whole lot, not just only lower organisms. We're also going to be looking at simple multicellular organisms and also complex multicellular organisms. We're going to see how the mechanism of their respiration. We're also going to be looking at their respiratory system, how it operates, how gaseous exchange takes place, even in amoeba, as small as it is. Now, if you're ready, join with me. Let us go through these topics as we can see them. Now, one thing you should note before we continue is that in practical terms, all living organisms breathe. All living organisms respire. All living organisms undergo gaseous change, whether it is a lower organism, even if it is a simple multicellular organism or a complex multicellular organism. As far as it meets the conditions for respiration or gaseous exchange can take place. Now, in this particular topic, we're going to be looking at several objectives. These are some of the things you should be able to explain or able to know at the end of this particular topic. You should be able to explain the mechanism of respiration in unicellular organisms or lower organisms, such as the protozoa, which includes the amoeba. And then number 2, you should be able to explain mechanism of respiration in multicellular organisms, such as the sponges. We also have the COELENTERATES, we have the ANNELIDS, the insects, the PISCES, amphibians, and mostly amphibians. We're going to be looking at this as we increase in the hierarchy of complexities. Now, in order to start up with this, let's look at that of amoeba. We said we're going to be talking about mechanism of respiration of amoeba. Now, first of all, understand that amoeba is a protist. And as a protist, there are what we call is a kingdom. Protist is a kingdom actually, and we have several phylum under this kingdom. We have the protozoa, we have the protophyta, we have the euglenophyta. Now, amoeba falls under protozoa. Now, protozoa can also be called animal-like protist. Animal-like protist. It simply means it shows certain characteristics of an animal. Now, apart from that, protists, let me give you 3 characteristics of protists. Now, number 1, like I said before, protists are unicellular organisms. It means they are just made up of one cell. So how can a single cell undergo gaseous exchange? We're going to be looking at that. So it is a unicellular organism. Not only that, it is a microscopic organism. Microscopic organism. And then also it is a eukaryotic organism. What I mean by eukaryotic, it simply means that they have definite nucleus. But that's not what we're going to be looking at today. I really want to major on the microscopic part of it and then the unicellular part of it. Now, amoeba, which is a protist, which is a microorganism, has its respiratory organ to be its entire body surface. The entire body surface of an amoeba is its respiratory organ. Now, remember I said something, that there are conditions that are necessary for respiration to occur or take place. Now, let me tell you why amoeba undergoes respiration. Now, amoeba meets all the conditions necessary for respiration. Number one, we said that it must have a respiratory medium. And we said that respiratory medium is the surrounding of that living organism where oxygen can be obtained. Now, in terms of amoeba, its respiratory medium is water, not air, water. Then another thing again we discussed, we said respiratory organ must be there. Now, the respiratory organ of amoeba, it's its entire body surface. Number three, we also said that there must be a respiratory surface. Respiratory surface. Now, the respiratory surface of amoeba is its cell membrane. The cell membrane of amoeba, it's its respiratory surface. And number four, we said that there must be a transport medium or respiratory medium, a transport medium. Now, the transport medium or the respiratory medium in amoeba is the cytoplasm. It is responsible for carrying the oxygen from one part of the plant, of the cell, to another where it is needed. And also ventilation simply means the easy flow or easy passage of air in and out. Of course, the amoeba is filled with ventilations. Okay, air flows over the water and all that. So you see that amoeba meets the requirement or the conditions that are necessary for respiration to occur. Now, diffusion is the easiest form through which gaseous exchange takes place in most protozoas. Example, amoeba. Now, why does amoeba need only diffusion? What is diffusion? Movement of molecules or ions from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration until it is evenly distributed. Now, as it relates to amoeba, amoeba applies the principles of diffusion. It applies diffusion for its gaseous exchange. Now, the reason is simple. Amoeba or all protozoa have large surface area to volume ratio. If you could remember in our last class on respiratory system 1, if you go back to it, we said that large surface area to volume ratio, if it increases also the rate of diffusion. Or I could say this, the rate of diffusion increases with increase in the surface area to volume ratio. So in other words, what we're saying is that diffusion is the only process by which amoeba and all other protozoa respire. Now, take a look at it now. During respiration in amoeba, the cell membrane acts as the respiratory surface. It acts as the respiratory surface. Now, the concentration of oxygen in the water, I'm also trying to explain diffusion. Now, by diffusion, the concentration of oxygen in water is higher compared to the concentration of oxygen inside the body or inside the cell of the amoeba. Hence, diffusion will take place. So there will be a movement of oxygen from the water, which is highly concentrated with oxygen, into the amoeba, which has low oxygen concentration, through the cell membrane, which is now acting as the respiratory surface. It is acting as the respiratory surface. Now, as oxygen is diffusing from the water into the body cells of the amoeba, simultaneously carbon dioxide inside of the body of the amoeba diffuses into the water simultaneously. And this process continues as long as the amoeba respire. So this is how amoeba undergo gaseous exchange. Now let's take a look at another organism that undergoes respiration. But this time it is not a unicellular organism. It is actually a simple multicellular organism. And that organism is sponges and coelenterata. Now, sponges and coelenterata, they belong to the kingdom Animalia. In fact, sponges belongs to the phylum called Porifera, which is the most primitive of all animals in terms of hierarchy. It is the primitive, in fact, it is a primitive multicellular animal. And then also after the phylum Porifera, we have the Coelenterata. Now the Coelenterata includes the Hydra, it includes the sea anemone, and so many others. They fall under the Coelenterata. Now all cells in sponges and Coelenterata are always in contact with water in which they live in. They are always in contact. So it simply means that their respiratory medium is what? The water. Now, during gaseous exchange, oxygen also diffuses into each cell and carbon dioxide diffuses out of the cell simultaneously. So gaseous exchange is between these cells and the water environment. And it is through the process of what? Diffusion. It is through also the process of diffusion. Now, however, a gaseous exchange continues. If gaseous exchange continues, remember we said oxygen is moving from the water and entering into the body cells, and then simultaneously carbon dioxide is moving from the body cells and going back into the water. Now, if it continues, if this gaseous exchange continues, it will get to the point where the water becomes saturated with carbon dioxide and then deficient in oxygen. Now, to help to maintain high diffusion process or diffusion rate so that the organism will not cease to respire and then die. Because if respiration ceases, remember we said that energy production will also what? Cease. And so the organism can't carry out metabolic what? Activities. So in order to maintain a high diffusion process or rate, flagellated cells of the body beats rhythmically to create what we call a water current. Now, this water current brings about a continuous replacement of carbon dioxide that has saturated the water with fresh supply of oxygen. So, in other words, the rate of diffusion is maintained. It is maintained. Carbon dioxide is not saturating the water, and oxygen is no longer what? Deficient. So this is how sponges as well as Coelenterates, example Hydra, carry out gaseous exchange. Carry out gaseous exchange. Now the next one is the annelids. Annelids. Now what are annelids? Annelids are actually called segmented worms. Segmented worms. Most of these segmented worms are hermaphrodites, and their bodies are all segmented. They are all segmented. In fact, some of them are radially symmetrical. An example of an annelid is the earthworm. The earthworm plays a major role in fact, earthworm is one of the major examples of annelids. Now, earthworm carries out gaseous exchange, using their moist or wet skin. They use moist or wet skin. Remember, we're still looking at lower multicellular organisms. So they carry out respiration using moist or wet skin. And the process through which gaseous exchange takes place in most lower organisms, lower multicellular organisms, is by diffusion. Please don't forget this. It's by diffusion. Now, by diffusion, through moist skin, oxygen enters into the epidermal cells. The epidermis of the tapeworm, gaseous exchange takes place through there, which is part of the moist skin. So oxygen enters into the epidermal cells. Now the epidermal cells, they are richly supplied with blood. They are richly supplied with blood. Now this blood takes in this oxygen from the epidermal cells and transports them to other parts of the body, mostly the tissues and the cells where they are needed. takes them to the tissues, takes them to the cells where they are needed. And simultaneously, as oxygen is being supplied to the tissues, carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide are also released from these tissues and cells into the blood, which carries it back to the epidermal cells. And from the epidermal cells, they are removed out of the body through the moist or wet skin. I hope you get that. So this is how this is how respiration or gaseous exchange takes place in annelids. Example is the earthworm. So we have another one, which is insects. Now, insects, they belong to the kingdom, yes, Animalia, and they belong to the phylum, which is called Arthropoda. Now, we have different classes of Arthropoda. We have the class which we call crustaceans. Now, crustaceans include examples like the crabs. We have the shrimps. We have the prawns. These are crustaceans. Also, we have another class of arthropoda. We have the insecta. The insecta include examples like the cockroach. We have the grasshoppers. We have the mosquitoes, the houseflies. We have the praying mantis, the locust. We have the termites. These are all examples of insects. Also, another class of arthropods. I told you we have about 4 classes of arthropods. The third class of arthropods is the arachnids. We are going to be talking about mechanism of respiration in arachnids. Now, in arachnids, they include the examples like the spider. So the spider is an arachnid. We also have another example of an arachnid. We have the scorpion. We have the ticks. We have the mites. These are all examples of what? Arachnids. Now, the arachnids, they are, of course, we've said their respiratory organ. We said it is what? We said it is the lung book or the book lungs. And then finally, the last class of arthropoda is the myriapoda. Now, examples of the myriapoda, we have the centipede as well as the millipede. Now, coming to the insecta, which is a class in arthropods, the insecta, their respiratory organ is the tracheal system. Gaseous exchange occurs through the tracheal system. Now, at the abdomen, if you look at the structure of the insect, at the abdomen, there is a tiny opening. Now, that tiny opening is what we call the spiracle. A tiny opening. Now, through the spiracle, gases enter. In fact, the spiracle serves as a permeability or as a permeable substance or structure through which oxygen enters and leaves the insect. So, through the spiracle, oxygen diffuses into the body of the insect, and then carbon dioxide diffuses out of the body of the insect. Now, during breathing, oxygen enters into the body of the insect through the spiracle. We've said that the spiracle is the tiny opening. So oxygen enters into the body of the insect through the spiracle. Now, the spiracle then leads the oxygen into certain tubes. The spiracle continues as a tube and it leads into the tracheae. Now, the tracheae further divides or leads into smaller tubes, which we call the tracheoles. Now, the tracheoles leads into body fluids. So, in other words, if oxygen passes through the spiracle, it enters into the trachea, and from the trachea, it passes through the tracheoles. From the tracheoles, this oxygen dissolves in the body fluid. Now, in the body fluid, where it dissolves, diffusion takes place. So the oxygen diffuses from the body fluids into various cells where they are used up. Now, simultaneously, as this happens, carbon dioxide from the cells diffuse into the blood fluids, and from the blood fluids it passes through the tracheals, from the tracheals through the tracheae, from the tracheae it comes out of the body of the insect through the spiracles. So this is how gaseous exchange or respiration takes place in the body of an insect. Remember, it is from the spiracle through the tracheae, from the tracheae through the tracheals, from the tracheals into the body fluids, from the body fluids it diffuses into the cells, the body cells and tissues where it is being used up, and then simultaneously carbon dioxide comes or diffuses out from the body cells and tissues into the blood fluid, so body fluid rather, from the body fluid through the tracheals, from tracheals through the tracheae, from the tracheae, and then out of the body through the spiracle. So this is the mechanism of respiration in insects. Now, let's take a look at mechanism of respiration in fishes. Mechanism of respiration in fishes. Now, the fish belongs to the kingdom Animalia, and it also belongs to the phylum which is called Chordata. Now, all Chordata, they are vertebrates. All Chordata are vertebrates. What are vertebrates? Animals with backbones, or you can say animals that have bones within them. They have bones within them, not without, but within them. So we have those animals referred to as vertebrates. Now, vertebrates are divided, or Chordata, they are divided into 5 various classes, 5 major classes. The first one is called the PISCES. Now, PISCES are also referred to as the fishes, and we're going to be discussing about their respiratory system much later. So we have the PISCES, and at number 2, we have the amphibians. We'll also be discussing the amphibians. So we have the amphibians, and number 3, we have the reptiles. Amphibians examples include the toad, the frog, the newt, and so on. And then in terms of reptiles, we have the lizard, we have the snakes, we have the crocodiles, and so on. And then number 4, we have the aves. The aves are the birds. The aves. Now the birds also have their respiratory medium. Okay, well, they also have their respiratory organ, which is also the lungs. And then finally we have mammals. And then that is the 5 classes of Chordata we have. Now, we talked about the first one, which is PISCES, also known as the fish. Now, the respiratory organ of the fish is gills. Respiratory organ of the fish is the gills. You've seen a fish before. Get a fish, look at both sides of the head of a fish. You'll find something covering the fish, the side of the fish. If you lift it up a bit, you are going to see what we call the gill chambers. The gill chambers. Now, the gill chambers consist of gills. In some fishes, you'll see 3 gills. In some fishes, you'll see 4 gills. Okay? So, inside of the upper column, that part that you lift open to see the gills is called the upper column. It is found at both sides of the fish, at the external sides of the fish. So we have the gill chamber. Now, each gill consists of what we call gill filaments. It consists of the gill filament. It consists of what we call gill rakers. And it also consists of what we call gill arc. Gill filament, gill rakers, and then gill arc. Now, please take note, one of the major functions of the gill filament is for gaseous exchange. The major function of the gill arc is to produce, it serves as a foundation for which the gill rakers are produced. Now, the gill rakers, the major function of the gill rakers is to hold down food particles, to hold down food particles. Now, let's see the mechanism of respiration in fish. What happens during respiration? Now, when the fish breathes, when the fish wants to breathe, the fish opens the mouth and then closes the upper column. It opens the mouth and then closes the upper column. Now, once the fish does that, water from the external environment rushes into the mouth of the fish. And as it rushes into the mouth of the fish, it enters the gill chamber. Now, once it enters the gill chamber, the gill rakers prevent food particles that are inside of the water from entering into the gills. It prevents it. And then once it prevents it, the water then enters into the gill filament. There in the gill filament, oxygen diffuses into the gill filament, and then carbon dioxide simultaneously diffuses out from the gill filament into the water. Now, that oxygen that diffuses into the fish or into the gill filament, in the gill filament, there is enough supply of blood vessels. Excuse me. There is enough supply of blood vessels, which are capillaries. And these capillaries take this oxygen to parts of the bodies of the fish and supplies it by diffusion to body cells and tissues where this oxygen is needed. And then also carbon dioxide diffuses out from body cells into the blood, and it returns back to the gill filament, and then the gill filament by diffusion pushes out or moves out the carbon dioxide into the water. By means of this, gaseous exchange is being established. Now, once it does that, after gaseous exchange, the upper column opens and the fish closes its mouth, and the upper column opens so that water containing dissolved carbon dioxide passes out of the body of the fish into the water body or environment. I hope you get that. So as water enters, the gaseous exchange takes place. After gaseous exchange, the fish closes the mouth, opens the upper column so that water containing enough supply of carbon dioxide is removed out of the body into the water environment. So this is how the fish carries out gaseous exchange. This is the mechanism of respiration of the fish. And then also, we also have mechanism of respiration in toad. Let's see how the toad carries out respiration. Now, in toad, there are 4 different respiratory organs. We have the gills, we have the mouth, we have the skin, and then we have the lungs. These are 4 different respiratory organs in a toad. Now, the gills is usually found in young tadpoles or in young toads, which are referred to as tadpoles. So in other words, the tadpoles carries out gaseous exchange through the gills, through their gills. In fact, at their early stage, they develop external gills, and later on, they develop internal gills. It simply means that the tadpole respires just like the fish. We have just finished looking at the mechanism of respiration of the fish. So it means that tadpoles also undergoes the same kind of respiration as the fish because of the presence of the gills. And then in the adult toad, I said that the adult toad carries out respiration or gaseous exchange using its mouth, using its skin, and then using its lungs. So let's take a look at how the adult toad carries out gaseous exchange with the mouth, with the skin, and then with the lungs. Now, to start with, let's look at that of the mouth. The mouth. Now, if you look at the structure we have there, that is the adult toad. Now, the mouth, gaseous exchange in an adult toad through the mouth is what we call buccal respiration. Now, in the adult toad, we're meant to be, like I said, the adult toad respires or has the skin, the mouth, and the lungs as its respiratory organs. And we're going to be looking at this respiratory organ, which is the mouth. The mouth. Now, remember that most amphibians, they live, in fact, most amphibians, like if we're looking at the toad and the frog, they live in both land and water. They live in both land and water. Now, when a toad is on land, a toad can respire through the mouth. And respiration through the mouth in adult toad is called buccal respiration. We call it buccal respiration. Now, during gaseous exchange, the mouth of the toad is closed, and then the nostrils is open. And the floor of the buccal cavity that is under is lowered. Now, this makes air from outside to rush in through the nostrils and enters into the lower part of the buccal cavity. Now, after this is done, the nostrils and the glottis are closed. However, gaseous exchange also takes place in the buccal cavity when the blood in the capillaries and inhaled air are exchanged. So gaseous exchange takes place there between the blood, capillaries, and what? The inhaled air. So it means that oxygen diffuses into the blood capillaries. Now, once this is done, carbon dioxide simultaneously is passed from the toad or from the blood back into the buccal cavity, and where in this case the buccal cavity is then raised up. The buccal cavity, the floor of the buccal cavity is then raised up. Once this happens, the nostrils is also opened again. Remember, it was closed when air starts entering into it. When air has entered into the lower buccal cavity and gaseous exchange has taken place, the glottis, like I said, and the nostrils are closed. But when the floor of the buccal cavity is raised open by the passage of carbon dioxide, the nostrils is open. And once the nostrils is open, air containing carbon dioxide is then forced out into the environment. This is how buccal respiration takes place in the toad. The next one is the cutaneous respiration. Now, cutaneous respiration is respiration through the skin, through the skin. Now, the adult toad is capable of respiring both on land and on water through its skin. So it can carry out respiration on land, it can carry out respiration on water through the skin. Now, the skin of toad, of an adult toad, has large surface area, it has moist skin, and it is well vascularized. It has a large surface area for easy diffusion. It has moist skin for also the respiratory gas to dissolve in, and then it is well vascularized. It is well vascularized. Now, when we're talking about well vascularized, it simply means that it has blood vessels or it has capillaries. Now, during gaseous exchange, oxygen on land and in water diffuse directly into the blood through moist skin. It is then transported by the blood to the body cells. Now, this oxygen that is being taken by the blood is transported by the blood to body cells and also tissues where they are used. Simultaneously also, carbon dioxide from body cells and tissues diffuse into the blood, and from the blood, it is diffused out of the body through the skin by the process we know as diffusion. So this is how the adult toad carries out respiration through its moist skin. And then finally, we also said that the adult toad carries out a respiration through its lungs. So it also has lungs for respiration. And most times, it is when it is on land. Now, during gaseous exchange, air passes through the nostrils of the adult toad, and from the nostrils, it passes through the glottis. From the glottis, it passes through the larynx, and from the larynx, it passes into the lungs. There in the lungs, oxygen diffuses into the blood, and the blood carries this oxygen to the cells and as well as the tissues where they are being used up. Simultaneously, carbon dioxide from the body cells and the tissues diffuse into the lungs, into the blood, and the blood carries them back to the lungs, and from the lungs it enters into the larynx, from the larynx to the glottis, and from the glottis carbon dioxide is drawn out of the body, or it's removed from the body through the nostrils. So this is how respiration occurs in an adult toad, through the skin, through the mouth, and also through the lungs. Now this brings us to this particular to the end of this particular topic on respiratory system 2. But before we go, let's look at some questions from our ExamGuide app. Let's take a look at some few questions here. Look at question 3. Okay, take a look at question 5, based on what we have discussed. It says there, the use of moist skin for respiration in amphibians is known as the use of moist skin. I told you when we're using the mouth, it is called buccal respiration. When the lungs is being used in toad, it is called pulmonary respiration. But when the skin it is being used, it is called cutaneous respiration. So the correct option is A. Look at question 6. In an adult toad, gaseous exchange takes place through the. In an adult toad, gaseous exchange takes place through the. Now, if you look at it, the first one says, option A says buccal cavity, bladder, and lungs. Yes, buccal cavity, but there is no bladder. And B says buccal cavity, skin, and lungs. That's the perfect combination. So the correct answer there is B. Look at question 7. They said in centipede, remember centipede is an arthropod, the exchange of gases is carried out through the correct answer is trachea. The trachea. And look at option 8. Let's look at option 9, which is the last one I'm going to treat for today. They said siphons and gills are structures in aquatic organisms used for, now it is used for gaseous exchange. Siphons are actually long tubes. They are mostly found in tadpoles. No, they're mostly found in mosquito larvae, which is also for gaseous what? Exchange. And also the gills is found in tadpoles. You can also see it in fishes, and they are also used for what? Gaseous exchange. So the correct option to this answer is option A.
Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes, like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.